Welcome to Vampire Pitches, the show where we pitch movies and streaming shows about vampires. Today, I have collected together some of my friends from across the entertainment industry, so I would really like to introduce you guys to them now. So, in no particular order except how my Zoom windows are arranged, just go ahead and I'll call you out and just tell us who you are and a little bit about yourself and what you like about vampires. So, Dave, let's start with you.
Hi, my name is David Bryant. I am a visual effects artist and writer. I have known Sean for going back nearly 20 years.
Yes.
And
yes.
I can repeat again, nobody loves vampires as much as Sean. So honored to be here. And my interest in vampires is they're sort of like the original superhero, supervillain in any literature that I can think of. They have amazing sort of powers that we don't quite understand, and they vary movie to movie. And sort of like the Western genre, it has become a genre of itself in that everyone tries their own kind of original spin on it. And I think it's a great genre all on its own.
Nice. Excellent. Ariel?
Hi, I'm Ariel Sinelnikoff. I'm a mainly horror writer and director, and I know Sean through my husband who works with him. And I love vampires, I think, just because they're such a rich kind of metaphor for so many things. You could talk about so many different kind of dark parts of our society through them, and they're kind of badass too. They do it in style. So yeah, I think that's why I love them.
Excellent. And last up, but not least, Dadrian.
Hi, I'm Dadrian Flavors, a writer, director, and visual effects producer and production manager from time to time. So what I love about vampires is sort of just how broad a stroke they've kind of covered, from everything from your 30 Days to Night these weird old vampires that are just like vicious creatures, to the sophisticated stuff, to trying like Anne Rice style vampires, where we've just made them this amazingly broad idea of a creature.
That's excellent. Absolutely. Okay, so those are our pitchers, and the pitching prompt that we're going with this time is an arranged marriage to a vampire. So each one of these pitches is going to have some sort of an arranged marriage to a vampire in it, but outside of that, it can be just about anything. So we could have comedy, drama, serious horror, Lifetime movie of the week, Hallmark Christmas film. It could be any of those. But one thing that I would like to throw out there is that these are not going to be made. There is no executive who is sitting there waiting to hear this pitch. This will not be going into production anywhere. This is just sort of a fun academic, just sort of fun thing to do amongst friends. So all those caveats being said, let's hear about some arranged marriages. Dave, would you like to lead us off and go first?
Not really, but I'll do it. First, it's always the tricky one.
Excellent.
Okay. This idea is for basically a show, episodic television show, and it was inspired by the burning of Notre Dame and the excavation that's happening during the restoration of that cathedral. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that particular news story. It happened during the pandemic, but when the spire fell and broke through the floor, it broke through like several hundred years worth of chambers that had not been accessed since like the 1300s or whatever. But the thing that fascinated me is that they end up pulling up this coffin that was made entirely of lead. And I was like, well, why would you do that? For what purpose does that serve? And the first thing that occurred to me was, this is the perfect opening to a vampire story.
This is fabulous.
Based roughly in reality. Okay, so we open on that. There's teams of historians and archaeologists all gathering around as this thing is brought up out of the floor. And quick observations are that it's far too heavy and that this is not a lead-lined coffin, it is solid. It is completely filled with lead. And the only purpose anyone could ever think to do that would be that the creators of it were not looking at it as a coffin, but as a prison. And it was placed face down. So with a lot of like vampire lore over the years, you know, and the occult beliefs that actually existed back then, people that were suspected of being vampires were staked down in their grave, face down, all these like very elaborate things. So this seems to kind of be in line with that belief system. So there's something suspicious about this particular individual. And the only indicator on the coffin is a small family crest and the name Radic. So now we flash back to 1487 Bosnia. There's a young girl in a Bosnian royal family, and she basically is cursed. She's haunted by some sort of unseen entity that reveals itself at age 6 when a schoolboy has a crush on her. Her name's Hannah. And when this boy has a crush on Hannah and starts to like act out and, you know, become best buds with her, he turns up drowned. And there's many cover-ups to this event. Maybe it was an accident, but there is suspicion on Hannah. Then at 10 years old, there is an abusive uncle, someone who has been abusing Hannah directly, and he is found disemboweled. So over the years, people have seen furniture being moved, objects being hurled across the room whenever she is in the room in the presence of men. So the royal family basically tries to deal with this by keeping her sequestered away from all boys and men. They don't quite understand it. They call in the Holy Roman, the Church of Rome to investigate this whole thing. They have a special secret order, you know, basically a cult subdivision that investigates occult happenings. And this is all basically inspired by the movie The Entity, starring Barbara Hershey in 1982, which I was terrified by. It's one of the scariest movies I've ever seen.
Excellent.
But it's a haunting about a very that is attached to a very, you know, specific individual. In our case, that's Hannah. The church decides to give her an exorcism, and it's incredibly terrifying for her. It's violent, and she is very traumatized by the experience. But they think it worked. So 10 years goes by, and she's being basically cared for by a convent that has been taking care of her education and still kind of keeping her away from men. And when the church decides that they think it's time that she actually become available for marriage, for courtship, and so they decide to give it a go. Everyone's got their fingers crossed. The exorcism seems to have worked. She is courted by a young prince. She's now around the age of like in her early 20s. And so is this prince. And things seem to be going well. She's head over heels in love with him through the whole courting process, very formalized and rigid and regal. They finally get to the point where they're expressing their feelings for each other, and it's this sort of first kiss moment, and he is assaulted by the entity, which has now grown even stronger. And this time it's witnessed by servants, by royal family members. They run into the room as she's screaming. They see the prince being suspended in the air, holding onto his throat. His face is turning red, and as they try to intervene, people are hurled away. And they are all in horror as they watch him get basically torn in half in front of them. So again, another cover-up, this time involving another royal family who is the prince's family. And now we're like, what do we do about this? So the secret order of the church shows up again, realizes they failed with the exorcism, and they have no choice but to perhaps try her as a witch and burn her, which was standard for the time in the 1400s. But there's one guy in the order who comes forward. He says, I think I have another idea that I want to put out there, he says to the king, her father. They have an ongoing situation. There is a prince in Croatia. That family has taken land away from Hannah's family, perhaps a century before, in another arranged marriage. And the church did not approve of that union, and they want that territory back under their influence. So they want to basically have Hannah marry this new prince.
And use her as a weapon?
Use her as a weapon. And the reason that the occult group here is involved in this is the main guy who runs this order suspects that this is a false line in Croatia. This royal line. They seem to be basically the same individual who is in power for decades, ages, disappears, and then reappears as his own heir in a much younger form. And based on portraits and things like this, he's convinced it's the same individual. This is not natural. They've stolen from the church, basically. It's a crime against God, all of this stuff. And so they're going to use Hannah as the Trojan horse, like the perfect sort of weapon, assuming that her entity will kill this immortal prince. We never used the word vampire. I don't think it was a term that was used back then. The audience will understand what it is, I believe. And so that's basically season one is the setup to introducing Hannah as the main character, and basically going to use her as a bomb, basically, against this Croatian prince. Season two, very briefly, will be her getting there after hearing all these stories about his crimes over the centuries, torture, genocide, all this stuff. Only she's incredibly surprised that he is kind, warm, generous, gentle, one of the nicest people she's ever met. He's cautious about the marriage as much as she is, and she ends up genuinely falling for him. And she doesn't really quite see any evidence of him being this monster. However, as the courtship is going forward, before they actually get married, the prince ends up turning her. So she's turned into a full vampire, and the unforeseen repercussions of this is that the entity that is tied to her also transforms into something 1,000 times more powerful. So now she feels guilty for not telling him this. She was not telling him the truth, but now that he has turned her, and this entity has attacked this prince and nearly killed him, and kills like dozens of people in the process. He barely survives. She tells him the truth, and he realizes that this is now a problem that is, the church and her family, everybody realizes this is a bigger problem than what this one vampire posed as an issue. So all these forces now must come together to take on this entity. That's basically season two. In the process, Hannah learns that the church has lied to her. They were basically hoping that she would die in this whole process. Her family has lied to her because they really only want this land back. And also, the prince has lied to her because he's not in love with her. He was using her for this massive land grab. And as most vampires do, are just super charming, and he just uses that to the utmost. So now Hannah basically realizes that she's surrounded by people who have been using her entire life, and this is like setting up the conflict that's going to be happening now to try to take out this entity. Fourth season basically is people failing at this, and also the revelation that Hannah is not possessed by this entity. She's not haunted by the entity. It's actually her. It is her subconscious acting psychokinetically, and that she is now the most powerful threat to, let's say, all of Eastern Europe. And so that's the whole thing in a nutshell, but I want to keep popping back to the future as this excavation in the cathedral is happening. The name on the coffin is the same name as the vampire prince. And that's what the audience is going to be thinking this whole time, is that he was entombed in this thing, when actually she bears his last name because she married him, and actually it's Hannah that's in the coffin. And we'll have to just figure out how they basically trap her and defeat her.
That is.
So I'm sorry if that went over 5 minutes. It's
no. That was four seasons of television, Dave. That's amazing.
I blame you, Sean. I never would have thought of this thing if it hadn't been for these limitations you put in our pitches, and now I've got 20 pages of notes.
I love it. Okay, well, that was an excellent pitch, Dave. So the three of us who did not pitch are going to act like movie executives, and we're just going to ask you some questions about it or comment on it. Would either of you guys like to go first? What did you think?
I love it.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Let me have it.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Dadrian.
Be brutal.
Have at it.
No, nothing too brutal. I suppose my first question would kind of fall into, so our first season, it didn't feel like we kind of have much of a big conflict other than sort of the stuff that's just happening internally to Hannah. And I'm just curious to see what we do as far as the vampire prince goes. Because it feels like from the pitch he was just sort of mentioned and we don't really see much of him. So I'd just be curious.
Yes, that is a totally valid note, and I totally agree with it. For a vampire pitch, we don't really get into topic of vampires in the pitch until basically the end of the first season. So I totally agree. I think there's room there in a 12-episode season, say, to show this prince being sort of reintroduced to society and the conflict with the church that exists, going back apparently generations in his family. So we can see that the church has motivations to take him out. We don't quite trust this church. It's a good way to introduce this this secret order that exists within the church that is obsessed with the occult. Yeah, excellent note. Thank you.
That's cool. So it's sort of like the vampire character is actually in the first season as sort of like B or C story, kind of rolling through until you find out like, oh wait, that dude is a vamp. Kind of like oh damn, what was the series that came out this year? Black Mass on Netflix.
Black Mass.
Oh yeah.
Loved it.
Yeah. Where you don't know it's a sorry, spoilers. You don't know it's a vampire story until like you hit a certain episode and you're like, wait a second. But it's
that is exactly
set up the whole
what I was
way
trying
through.
to accomplish. I didn't want to kind of give away too early the fact that this is a vampire, but at the same time, when the church tells her and her family about the existence of this Croatian prince and they think he's immortal and all this, I don't want that to come out of like left field. Like this would seem like bad writing, obviously, if this just like, oh, by the way, we're going to use you as a bomb. There has to be some setup. There has to be. I totally agree with Dadrian in that regard. Like, we need to see this character. We need to realize the church has an ulterior motive for removing him from power. But we probably shouldn't give away per se that he's a vampire. Maybe he is aware that vampirism existed in his family, or I want the audience to not be totally convinced yet that he is one.
Nice.
What I really like about season 1, it's kind of reminding me of, at least structurally, if you've seen Westworld, or kind of what I think they're doing with the new Game of Thrones series, House of the Dragon, where season 1 is almost like a prequel to the rest of the series. It's setting up everything you need to know, all the players, so that way season 2, 3, beyond, you get everything going on with this really rich backstory. So I think that's really cool. I love this idea of not fully saying it's a vampire. It kind of reminds me, if you've ever seen, I think it's called Trouble Every Day by Claire Denis. It's this fantastic vampire film where they never call them vampires. And I think it takes a while, maybe like halfway through the movie. It's been a while since I've seen it, but you don't even really realize, stuff is going on, but you don't realize that they're vampires until a good ways into the film. And I think that it makes it kind of creepier, you know, of like what's going on. Obviously something supernatural, but what exactly is that? And then realizing, oh, it's vampires. That, I mean, they're so, that's what's so great about them, is they're so, like, they can really kind of creep around, really disguise themselves. So I think that'll be really fun to play around with.
I totally agree, Ariel. I think that is, for some reason, when the word vampire is used, there's so much like preloaded that goes with that term that you can turn off half the audience if it, you know, if that's not something that they're into. But you can win over those people if you give them a chance to become fascinated by the character, by, you know, scaring the pants off them in some other way, and then they're like, what is this? And it's sort of a backdoor into explaining, you know, the larger world of the vampire. It's a way to kind of trick the fish onto the hook, basically, and capture an audience that you might not otherwise get.
Well, kind of like you were saying with Hannah, it's a Trojan horse in a way.
Exactly. And basically this came about only because I just want to see this unseen entity fighting a vampire, because that's a battle I've never seen before. I've never heard of vampires fighting ghosts or anything like this. And just visually, I have to see that somehow.
I was gonna say, when you started setting that up, like that to me is where this thing really took off. When you were like, oh yeah, we're going to arrange a marriage as like kind of an assassination attempt, like using this girl's haunting to bring down an enemy. I was like, I don't think I've ever heard of that before. Like that's some sinister shit right there. And then the whole, like, you know, he turns her and then the entity becomes stronger and worse. I was like, oh my God, please keep talking. So that's yeah, that's fabulous stuff.
There's a lot of different things. I was trying to like pare it all down to just this pitch, but yeah, obviously there's room for a lot of characters and a lot of twists, surprises. So I think I might actually write this one out.
That's great. I'm so happy to hear that. All right. Well, Dave, excellent pitch. That is a real winner to get us started off here. Ariel, would you care to go next?
Sure. So mine is a horror feature, kind of horror, not quite sci-fi, but we're getting to some science stuff. And it was very much inspired in terms of like tone and whatnot. I'm thinking kind of along the lines of like The Hunger or like Let the Right One In. So sort of more like artsy kind of like vampire film. And I really wanted to play with the kind of gothic literature trope, but modernize it in a way. So using that along with the fact that I've been really fascinated with the whole Elizabeth Holmes Theranos situation. I've been watching The Dropout lately, so you'll probably see that influenced a little bit in this. So don't have a title yet, so if you have any ideas, let me know. But we begin in present day San Francisco with a man named Richard, who is a very renowned biotech investor, kind of like an angel investor. His family has been in medicine for decades, for generations. And he is particularly drawn to medicine because of his daughter, Lizzie, who is in her 20s, and she has an extremely rare blood disorder called polycythemia vera, which essentially causes her body to produce an excess amount of blood compared to the average human. So she has such a severe case that the doctors, no matter how good of doctors they go to, they basically told her, this combined with the fact that she has an O negative blood type, which even though it's a universal donor, she can only receive O negative blood. Hers is so rare that they can't do much. And essentially they tell her, it's inevitable, you're going to develop a blood clot one day and probably die from it. So they're kind of out of luck there. And because of this, she's had to drop out of college and return home to her dad in San Francisco and live with him to kind of care for her. And when she returns home, she ends up meeting a man named Adam, who is around her age, and he is a young biotech entrepreneur who her dad is trying to invest in his company. And basically, he is kind of hot on the scene in Silicon Valley right now because he has created this new medical technique where essentially it could help prevent most blood disease, anything that can develop in your blood. And basically this technique involves, like, let's say you go out for a night of partying, right? you drink, you maybe do some drugs. You don't want that to affect your long-term health. Well, the next day you go into one of his clinics and essentially you get clean blood from O negative donors transfused into you. And in theory, according to trials that he's done, it helps prevent future disease, and it's also showing to perhaps cure already developed diseases. So really, really big. He's not launched yet. He's still working in his lab, in his home. And so he's, him and Richard are kind of working out a deal for investment. And part of the reason why Richard is investing in Adam, other than he believes in his medicine, is Richard's and Adam's family go back centuries. Essentially, Adam's ancestors helped Richard's ancestors, who are also like Adam's Romanian, immigrate to America, and basically they invested in Richard's family's business, which also was medicine. So they go way, way back. So kind of there's this trust there. So Lizzie comes home to all of this, had no idea Adam was this family friend that's kind of been around for years, just as meeting him for the first time. And immediately he charms her. They're really getting along, really seem to be into each other. And Richard really notices this, and notices in particular that Adam specifically is taking to Lizzie. Even though Lizzie, her health is really declining, he kind of brings out this spirit in her that she had kind of lost because of her, illness. And so Richard sits Lizzie down one day and says, look, I can see you two are very much into each other. This guy, his business is definitely going to take off. He is absolutely going to become a rich man, so you'll be well taken care of. And on top of that, he might actually be able to cure your disease. If not cure it, at least really help it in ways none of the doctors we've been to have been able to do. So I think you should marry this guy. And Lizzie says, I agree. He hasn't proposed yet. If he does, I think I will. Lo and behold, Adam proposes to her soon after, and they get engaged. But what's really odd is, despite the fact that Richard is this big socialite in San Francisco, he keeps the engagement under wraps, which is a little weird to Lizzie, but she doesn't think too much of it. So immediately after the engagement, Lizzie moves in with Adam. And Adam lives in the infamous Westerfield house in Alamo Square, which is a real house. And if you know anything about it, it's super duper haunted because the likes of some of the Manson family and Antoine LaVey used to live there. So he has now bought it.
Oh my God.
It's a beautiful mansion. It's like one of those old Victorians, but very, very haunted. So he lives there and he has his lab down there. So Lizzie moves in and immediately he says, I think we should get started with your treatments because we want to get you back to health, especially, hopefully before the wedding. So he kind of takes her down to his lab, explains to her the process and says, look, this is going to be a multi-step process. What we're going to be doing is having these sessions where essentially because you already have an illness, we're going to have to drain your blood, not all in one sitting, but over the course of many sessions. So we're going to drain you of your blood that has this illness in it and transfuse you with quote unquote clean blood from my donors who are also O negative. So there's not going to be any problems with that. And Lizzie says, great, let's do it. So she sits down for her first session. He puts, the needle in one arm to drain her, needle in the other arm to infuse her once that's being drained. And she's awake during this. But she starts to notice, she's getting a little woozy, as one would, while getting their blood drained. And she starts to have these really bizarre hallucinations, which involve, and they happen every single time she gets her treatments done. And essentially, they involve some version of Adam going up to the blood bag that she's, her blood is going into and drinking it. And she's like, well, that's a little weird, but I'm woozy. It's the hallucination. What's even weirder, though, is after that happens, she notices that he taps his own vein and puts it into the blood that is transfusing her blood. But she wakes up after each session and everything, sees no evidence of this. She thinks, again, it's a hallucination. I'm getting my blood drained. So she goes about, but more weird things start to happen. After her transfusions, she'll kind of stay in the lab to kind of, decompress, get back to normal. And she starts to see what she believes are ghosts, which is not that weird. She's heard this house is haunted. And each time she sees a ghost, it's not always the same ghost, but each one is a gaunt, pale woman who seems to be wandering the halls of this lab. But again, she's woozy. from her transfusion, so doesn't think a ton of it. So she has these sessions, time goes by. Eventually Adam is like, you know, I know we were thinking about doing this big wedding. I'm not really that guy. I really just want to be married to you as soon as possible. Let's just get married now. And Lizzie says, great, I'm not a flashy gal. Let's do it. So they have a small wedding ceremony in his house, just the two of them and her father as a witness. Coincidentally, the night of their wedding, they happen to plan her last transfusion. And so she's like, great, in theory after this, I might be cured. At the very least, I'll feel better than I have before. So they sit down as usual to do the transfusion. But this time things get a little bit weirder than usual. This time, instead of seeing the usual hallucination of Adam drinking from her blood bag, he drinks directly from her wrist. And that basically causes her to faint. She blacks out. And when she comes to the next morning, she's feeling so much better. She's feeling stronger. She's feeling more alert. She's like, great, it worked. I'm cured. Until she realizes she's very hungry. And not hungry for food. She is hungry for blood. So she's like, she goes to Adam and she says, what is going on? Why am I craving blood? I see these blood vials in your lab. I want to drink them. I have no idea why. Tell me what's happening. And he explains to her, well, that's normal because technically I cured you of your disease because you can't die because you're now a vampire. And she's like, what? And he says, yes, you're a vampire now. And you're a vampire because I'm also a vampire, and those hallucinations, they weren't hallucinations. I was doing the process of turning into a vampire. And essentially he tells her, this is the secret to my business. What I have done is those donors of mine were humans that I have turned into vampires. And essentially they are an endless blood bag for my patients. Turns out vampires have kind of special properties in their blood where if you don't do the whole, kind of Anne Rice, I drink from your blood, you drink from mine. If you just give a human a vampire's blood, it can actually heal a lot of illnesses. So he's turned a bunch of women into vampires to essentially be blood bags for him. And he specifically sought out Lizzie because of her rare blood disorder. Because as a human, she produces an excess amount of blood. As a vampire, she will as well. But now she just can't die. So Lizzie is obviously horrified. And Adam says, yep, now you're mine, and I'm keeping you down in my lab. He locks her away with the other, what he calls donors. They're really just sires. And very long story short, I won't go through all the details, but through a series of events where Lizzie escapes and returns home to her dad, she finds out horrifically that not only did all this happen, but her dad completely knew about it. And this was an arranged marriage because, as it turns out, her ancestors that were helped by Adam's ancestors, they weren't Adam's ancestors at all. They were Adam, who is a very old vampire from Romania, like her family. And essentially, he did help her family get from Romania to the US. He helped them start their medical business. But the catch was, okay, I'll do all this for you, but you have, I scratch your back, you scratch mine. You, Lizzie's ancestor, and all of your children and their children's children, you have to help me in some way. And so her ancestors have done a variety of things, from getting him humans to feed on to whatever, up until Richard, who hadn't done his part yet. And he didn't, he has a lot of ethical issues with feeding people to a vampire and whatnot. And he was hoping that just investing in his business would be the trick, but wasn't cutting it. And so essentially he gave his daughter in the hopes that he would cure her, Adam would cure her and not turn her into a vampire, but just cure her of her disease. But it turns out, even though he technically did, he also turned her into a vampire. And long story short, a bunch of drama ensues and Lizzie has to fight Adam and try and escape in the end.
Oh, yes. Absolutely. That is wonderful.
Thank you.
Oof. Some dark stuff in there. Seriously dark stuff.
Very dark. I've been really fascinated, like I said, with the whole Theranos thing and thinking, well, that involved blood, vampire, the whole thing with vampires is blood. And I kind of wanted to play around with what would happen if you had kind of like this corrupt medical vampire, I guess you could call it. So yeah, I had a lot of fun kind of playing around with that.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Guys, what do you think?
It's a lot of fun. I mean, I think there's, like Sean was saying, it's really dark, and I was kind of falling into this idea of like, I mean, how much body horror are you going to go into and some of the other stuff, because it just feels like the right place with this bizarre medical treatments going on, like all the experiments he's probably done on these sires to
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I would love to, like, I've actually been really wanting to do a body horror film for a while, and so I definitely would love to play around with that. Needles, I have a huge irrational fear of needles, so needles will definitely be a big part of this, and like comparing needles to vampire fangs, like things like that. So definitely going to play around with the body horror in that.
I could see Cronenberg taking this on. It would fit with him visually for a lot of this stuff. I love the darkness of it and the originality of creating vampires in this way I've never seen before. That's great. A question about the process of the creation. Are all recipients, all patients that receive this blood, do they end up becoming vampires? Or what's the cutoff in terms of the amount of blood that you have to have? Or
yeah, so it's kind of like I'm kind of taking the whole Anne Rice, the human drinks from a vampire, and then the vampire drinks from them, or I think it's vice versa. And so essentially the way it works is because Adam is drinking their blood, even though it's not directly from their veins, it's through blood bags, and then he transfuses them with his blood. It's only the donors that are turned into vampires. But if you were to give a regular human just vampire blood, but the vampire doesn't drink from their body, they don't turn into vampires. They're just healed of whatever ailments they have.
Gotcha. So she becomes the exception because...
Exactly.
Yeah, I got it.
Yeah,
I love it.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's outstanding. I love the, like, when you were describing, like, oh, she goes in for her first treatment and she's looked up at this, and I'm like, and then does he just take the hose and just stick it in his mouth and start sucking it? Like, I was about to make that joke, and then like you actually went there, but in a really horrifying way. And I was like, it's not funny anymore.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no, that is, and what I mean, God, I completely felt the betrayal as soon as he's like, oh yeah, no, I just keep vampirizing all these women and I keep them locked up down the basement, and now you're one of them. Like, you're not special, you're not, a favorite, like, I'm just gonna lock you down there with them. And you're sort of like my prize specimen. It's just like, oh God. And as soon as you said, yeah, she escapes, I was like, oh, thank God. And then you're like, she has to fight him in the end. Is there something that is there something that she has that she's able to use against him that has something to do with her condition?
Kind of. So I actually had a whole outline written. I was like, it's going to be more than 5 minutes, so I didn't. So essentially, the very short version of what happens is she aligns with the other donors, like his sires, and through the original sire, she finds out that if a vampire drinks their own blood, it can kill them, and so she has to basically trick Adam into drinking his own blood.
I love it. Oh, I love it. That's great. That's great.
I kind of want to play around with the idea of like, oh, him getting a literal taste of his own medicine, and so see, I've never really seen that done in a vampire.
There's your title. That's the title of your project right there.
Taste of his own medicine.
That's outstanding. Oh God, and what a fun little bit of extra lore to use there at the end. Yeah, that's really great.
It was really funny because, like, when Dave, when you were pitching yours, you were talking about how the prince, because he's a vampire, like all vampires have that charm. I was like yes, like that's exactly kind of what happens with Adam and Pierre. Is like he seems so charming, like any vampire kind of does, and then it's that immediate turn of like, oh no, you're the most dangerous, basically, monster out there.
It's all love and butterflies until they're hungry. Right?
Exactly. That's the title.
I was just gonna say, like, that's actually a pretty good title too. Yeah. That's amazing. That's amazing, Ariel. Well done.
Thanks.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Time well spent. Okay, Dadrian, are you up?
Yeah, I guess I'm up.
All right.
So, all right. Hopefully, hopefully it stands up to those last two. Those were excellent. So, um, all right. So mine is a horror feature. Right now I'm kind of juggling the title Blood and Glamour, but or maybe like something like Hollywood Blood and Glamour. Pretty terrible titles, and we'll see how that pans out. But totally, it's sort of like an energetic horror in the vein of maybe Last Night in Soho or some of that Edgar Wright hyperkinetic ideas. But we're set in 1935, and it's basically the morning of the Academy Awards at the Biltmore Hotel, which is this actual well-known hotel down in downtown LA. So there's the hustle and bustle as everybody's setting up for this big event, and we're following our protagonist, Nanette Washington. She's 19, fresh to LA from Chicago and trying to set up her own life here. She's still kind of soaking up all the glitz and glamour of Hollywood, but at this point, America and Hollywood's still segregated, so she enters the coloreds-only entrance to the Biltmore Hotel as a housekeeper. So on the other side of the hotel, we're starting to see these crates delivered to the back of the Biltmore, along with like the owner of the hotel welcoming this group of foreign dignitaries and producers and declaring that they and their families are welcome anywhere in the building. So from there, we're sort of introduced to how strict the management in the Biltmore is, especially with people of color. The house cleaners are made sure to pull down the drapes and make sure everything's closed off on the rooms for the 6th and 7th floor. The next closing blinds in the penthouse, and just sort of reciting the scene from one of her favorite movies, and spots one of the crates that we saw earlier, only it's open. And behind her, this young, handsome, pale European gentleman, Victor Endarian, finishes the scene with her, kind of startling her out of it. But it's this sort of meet cute, but Annette's kind of rushed out of the room by the hotel owner. So from here, we're seeing all these stars start showing up. Clark Gable and Joan Crawford, in particular, as the big wigs from like RKO and MGM and the other big five start showing up, and our focus for this story is more to do with MGM. I'll get into that a little later. So the Academy Awards start up, and we as an audience realize the top floors are actually holding a wedding between our vampire prince Victor and this French woman named Marie. And it's been basically arranged to bring these Western and Eastern European families back together following this major internal strife. And what better way to celebrate that level of arrangement than massacring the biggest and brightest names of the golden age of Hollywood? So Victor at this point is sort of this significantly older, bored vampire, and the only thing that sparked his interest in like the last 50 years has been film. It's like this completely new medium that's starting to hit its stride, and Marie's pretty much just duty bound with her family to go along with this thing. She's always had a thing for Victor, but he's always been kind of distant and moody. So our fun twist at this point is that basically now he has a crush on a black housekeeper who has this shared interest in film. So from there, the night starts rationing up as the building gets locked down and vampires start slowly taking stars and starlets out. Like we're just kind of creeping along and seeing people go off to rooms and disappear. And by the time we get to the end of the night, everyone starts noticing something's up, and sort of this charm that the vampires have been throwing out gets pulled away, and they just start massacring people. So Nanette ends up teaming up with Clark Gable, and eventually we've got this sort of interesting thing as to who has the mystery of who set up this whole thing and what do they actually want. And I like playing with the idea that like Joan Crawford and Hedy Lamarr and a few other major actors at the time are sort of like, is it one of them because they'd like to stay immortal forever and young? And sort of the big twist is that it's not. It's actually a producer who's one of Louis B. Mayer's bastard children, who's decided that he wants to take over Hollywood. And like, well, if I as a producer am always the tastemaker, then I can always make sure that things are right because I know what everybody wants. I know Hollywood, and that's sort of the big thematic thing that I like from this sort of story was just running with like, all right, what's this idea of old versus new, where what happens whenever someone new is trying to usurp this whole thing, and how badly that always plays out, because you can never always be fresh and new and know everything. There's always got to be a turnover just for the natural world to work. But don't have quite an ending yet. But I just wanted to run with this idea of
Damn it.
yeah, I know. That was the sad part. I just didn't have time to come up with exactly where I wanted it to land. But I did like the idea of we've got this, what pseudo starts off as, in our eyes, as a romance. But as we realize, like, no, Victor's still a vicious, bloodthirsty vampire that's been killing people for over 1,000 years. So yeah, it's going to be hard for a leopard to change its stripes, and Annette's not stupid enough to completely fall for that as she starts seeing what's happening. So she and basically Clark Gable and a couple other stars end up teaming up to try and find a way out. And we've got like old school vampires, so it's original Dracula rules where you've got to cut off the head and crush the heart and burn them alive to actually kill them off. It's not kind of one or the other. So it's incredibly difficult for this team of just, I mean, for all intents and purposes, random people to try and kill off these super powerful creatures. And ultimately they end up burning down the Biltmore to kill everybody off. And we're playing with sort of Quentin Tarantino alternate universe rules where we don't know exactly who's going to die, because any of the stars can die. It's not really based around historical events.
That was going to be my question, is anybody can die. It's like, historical characters can get taken out. We can see Humphrey Bogart, get ripped in half, or, whatever. It would be like amazing to see who gets killed, who survives, who becomes a hero. I'm in, man. Count me in.
Yeah, no, that was sort of exactly what I really wanted to play with. And I like the idea that, like, all right, we've all heard the stories of how Joan Crawford was so vain and so egotistical at the time, but to get to play with, like, well, she has that in her, but she's still like a decent human by the end of this, and she's actually helping. She's not the one that caused all this to happen out of her vanity. She's trying to stop it.
I was so glad when you mentioned the Tarantino alternate history, because immediately when you said this, I was like, oh my God, it's just like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood in that sense, or like Inglourious Basterds. I am so obsessed with this idea. Like, I want to see this be made because it's so good. It's just
it's so good.
I love that there's just this inherent metaphor, like about how you said, people trying to strive to be young and fresh, like constantly, and that's just impossible. And I feel like, especially in this era of like, just in this era alone, but in general, we have this obsession with Hollywood and the movies like this, where we expect that. And especially at this time, there was just so much darkness going on. If you look at, what was happening with like Judy Garland and like Marilyn Monroe, all those starlets, so much horror was going on, and it was being masked by all the glitz and the glamour. And so I think that's just such a beautiful metaphor that's inherent to the story of it, and you can just bring it out more and more however you like, through the writing, through the directing, and all that.
Right. Yeah, no, and that's why I really like the MGM angle, because Meyer was just known for harassing so many actresses and being so terrible to people. It's like, it'd be fun to play with that, and of course get some kind of a little comeuppance of him dying terribly. But
what a great twist that it was his like bastard son who wants to be like him. Like, oh my God, it's so good.
I think you would actually get studio interest in this project, because Hollywood loves to lampoon itself. They air the dirty laundry because it's fascinating stuff. I think they would go for this.
Oh my God. It's just like the idea of like Clark Gable suddenly becoming like an on-the-spot vampire hunter hero in a tuxedo, a bloodstained tuxedo in the middle of the Academy Awards. I mean, this is amazing, Dadrian. And and one of the things that I really love about it is the fact that the main vampire loves the movies. And the fact that is your main character's name Annette?
Nanette. Yeah.
Nanette, sorry. I love the fact that he and Nanette sort of have this like, oh, wait, no, you're really into this stuff too? And like, they have this sort of meeting of the minds that then can carry over through the whole movie, where like, you know, yeah, his whole clan is, you know, massacring Hollywood, but like he's very specific about like, well, I'm not gonna kill her, like she, you know, right. she's and she's like, you know, I think I can go talk to him, you guys, and like I see these moments where there's just like absolute bedlam going on in the auditorium, and the two of them are kind of standing there in the middle of it, just like having a conversation, just like because there's that mutual respect there. That's incredible.
There's also an opportunity there, I think, to talk about you know, separating the creators of art from the art itself. And, you know, people can be pretty despicable people and still come up with some, you know, amazing pieces of art. And it would be really interesting to have, it could almost be in a comedic moment where, you know, somebody's going to kill this vampire, like, man, I just loved you in this thing and you were just so great. I'm just a huge fan, but yeah, you got to die. And then just
I have one request, and I don't know how it's going to happen if you're going to do it the original, like Dracula killing vampire way, but I really want to see a vampire get killed with a literal Academy Award somehow.
Oh,
like,
yes.
Whether it's like sharpened or something, like that would just be amazing.
Oh yes, yeah, that has to happen, definitely.
Yeah, that's a brilliant visual. I love it.
And they have to say during the swing as they stake them with it is the award goes to. Sorry, we've just turned this into utter camp now.
Yeah.
No, there's got to be moments. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and actually, I think it's great that you don't have an ending yet, because there's so much that feels like the type of project where there's so much you could do with it based on who is in that audience, and who winds up being the heroes, who winds up being the cowards, like all of the business that happens in there can really inform how the movie resolves. And so like it just sounds like such fun, fertile ground to play around in.
Yeah, and that was kind of what ended up happening. I just kept writing notes and like, oh well, I could do this. Like, well, I don't know how it's gonna. It's just ran away with itself. So
there's also,
that's fabulous.
There's so much opportunity to have like reference. Like I just want to see Clark Gable like killing a vampire, and like the vampire is like, no, stop, and he's like, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn, and then like just like something. Like you can have fun references like that. Like if you don't want to go full camp, it could be like that cusp of like, oh, we're leaning a little bit into it, but like not fully. It's still horror. Like, just so much rich material to work with.
Oh my God, dude. Yeah, nicely done. I look forward to seeing that on the screen in 5 years. That's a fabulous idea.
That's the hope. I never would have thought about it without the setup. So
excellent, excellent. Well, that yielded some gold there. That's fantastic. I'm actually a little embarrassed to do mine now after so many good pitches. But if you guys will indulge me,
bring it.
I don't have a title for this one either. So if you can think of one, fantastic. But so this particular story takes place modern day, but it has to begin with a flashback to why this is happening. And the flashback goes back into the 1930s in America during the Dust Bowl. And for those people who may not be familiar with what the Dust Bowl is, it was this horrific ecological catastrophe that hit the middle of the country that was a result of a sudden drought and years and years and years of very bad farming practices. And so what happened was that the topsoil was completely destroyed from like Canada down to Texas. And then when the rains stopped falling, and the winds picked up, the topsoil was just blown away into these massive dust storms that just went on for years. And there were times where it was so bad that like the sun was completely blotted out, and it felt like you were just in the middle of night during the day. And these dust storms rolled from the Rocky Mountains all the way to the East Coast. And like there was a year where New York had red snow. And so this happened right in the middle of the Great Depression. So like the ecological catastrophe was paired with this economic catastrophe. And so what you wound up with is this entire third of the country, right in the middle of the country, not only had they lost all of their money and the banks all foreclosed, but they had no way of working or producing food. And so there was massive starvation and rampant unemployment, and it just led to lots of people just either dying or leaving and heading out west, hoping that conditions would be better or that they could find work. So with that setup, this particular setting for sort of the original flashback is right in the panhandle of Oklahoma, in a tiny little town, little farming community called Patience. And Patience, Oklahoma is devastated by the Dust Bowl, and the residents are packing up and they're moving out, and there's a particularly bad day where the dust was just thick and black and opaque. And as the main body of the town was getting ready to caravan out, this woman appears out of the dust, and her eyes are glowing red. And she walks up to the caravan and says, "I'm looking for a man with the last name of Seneca." And there's a woman who has basically a very old pickup truck with her 3 kids in it, and she's basically like, "You're a few weeks too late. That was my husband, and he died." And the woman who came out of the dust is upset about this. She doesn't fly into a rage or anything, but she looks around and says, "I can reverse your fortunes. I can save your town, but you have to promise me one thing in return, and that is that I will be given your first male heir of the line of Seneca to be married." And this is all very weird, but the town all kind of weighs in, and they're like, this may be a deal with the devil, but this is probably the best deal we're going to get. And, you know, the mother is, you know, looking at her 3 kids who are, you know, starving and everything like that. And she says, "All right." And so the woman from the dust returns back into the dust cloud and disappears. But then the dust parts around the area of their town, and it starts raining. And a few days later, green starts popping up out of the ground. And for whatever reason, the dust storms just always miss Patience. And they're able to actually have some crop yields, and things really start to turn around. They sort of become this haven in the middle of the Midwest where they actually have good luck, and jobs start to become available. And so over the course of time, you know, down through up until the modern day, Patience becomes this amazing sort of like Oklahoma haven of, you know, millionaires who are on vacation, who have, you know, houses on the pond, and, you know, there's just antique stores as far as the eye can see. It's this really well-to-do sort of retreat in Oklahoma, all because of this one deal that they struck back in their darkest hour. But the thing is that the mother never had any other kids. She had 3 daughters. None of them had any sons. They all had daughters. Until right around 1999, where one of the granddaughters went in for an ultrasound and found that she was also going to have a daughter, but it was going to be twins, and one of them was a boy. And so she, having no idea about this, deal that was made generations before she was born, very excited, but then her grandmother comes to her and is like, you have to leave this town before you give birth. And so she basically gets, because her grandmother was one of those daughters in that pickup truck and saw what actually happened. So the mom leaves. I don't have a name for the mom. I'm sorry, Mama Seneca, but there's, last name is actually Donnelly at this point because they're all female heirs. But so she moves out to the West Coast, has her kids, Brian and Bridget Donnelly, and they just sort of, grow up and go through school and finish college. And Brian has never really had the best luck with dating, especially in Los Angeles. It always just kind of feels like he's never exactly what his partner wants. And so it's just a lot of his relationships just kind of wind up dissolving. And he has been studying anthropology and decides to do, some of his own genealogy and discovers that, oh my God, wait, no, we're from the middle of Oklahoma, and our family is kind of like the Kennedys of this little town. And he's like, you know what? I'm going to take a long weekend, and I'm just going to pop over there and do a little family research. So without his mom knowing it, he and his sister, hop in the car and just head out and show up in Patience. And it is a gorgeous little town. They're like, oh my God, this place is amazing. And it's so, it's just so cute. And then a dust storm rolls in almost immediately when they get there. And the woman walks out of the dust again and says, you're mine, we are engaged to be married. And we will be married in 17 days at the full moon. And he's like, what the hell is happening? And she basically kidnaps him, and no one in the town will help him because they're all aware of someday this bill was going to come due. And so she takes him prisoner, essentially, back to her lair, which is sort of outside of town, which is, I imagine, like some very old, sort of like almost kind of like farm mansion, some very weird structure, like from a bygone era out in the middle of, some hills somewhere. And basically holds him prisoner. So we have a little bit of a Beauty and the Beast thing going on for a little bit, and she explains the situation and says, like, this is ironclad, like this is just what's going to happen. You are what I am owed for saving the town. And he's basically like, well, this sucks for everybody. But I also think this kind of sucks for you too, vampire lady, whose name is Serena Caliban. And so he has to coax her name out of her. Like, in order to try and figure out his situation, he starts talking to her, and he eventually comes to the decision. He's like, okay, look, I will honor this agreement. I will happily get married to you in 17 days' time, but if this is going to happen, I want this to happen. I want a wedding. And I want my family, and I want my friends, and I want this to be a big deal. So if you're okay with that, then let's actually do this. And she, of course, is like not expecting this at all, because she's just like, I'm sort of a villain. I'm going to, you know, kidnap this young man and marry him, and that's the... And so what starts to happen is, over the course of the 17 days, he starts planning this wedding. And he's including her in the planning of it, to the point where he's like, okay, so for floral arrangements, what's your favorite color? And she's just like, I haven't had a favorite color for 500 years. He was like, well, what was your favorite color? She was like, orange? And he was like, that's real. Why orange? And then she remembers the story of her uncle when she was a child bringing her an orange from a trip he was on, and that being such an amazing moment for her. And so those sorts of moments just kind of start stacking up over the course of the 17 days. And by the time it's time for the wedding, like the wedding is kind of the, you know, the end of the second act, beginning of the third act, where they, you know, they're having it outside. It's not taking place in a church because she needs to be able to attend. But like, you know, his side of the wedding is like, you know, full seats are full. Her side totally empty. And so like, you know, they basically come up to the altar where the officiant is, and he's like, no, this isn't right. Like and so he calls out, you know, his sister, and is like, will you be her maid of honor? And, you know, will you girls, will you be her part of the wedding party, her bridesmaids? And so like they kind of come up, and he's like, look, any of you guys who are from families who have, you know, who go back to this original thing, you guys be on her side of the wedding. Like move over to these seats. We're gonna even this out. And so suddenly he's made it so that this is both of their weddings. And so when it's time to exchange the rings, he pulls out this ring that he had made for her, because he's at a certain point he's allowed to leave the house. Like, she's trusted him enough, he's allowed to leave the house, but due to the magical nature of this, he can't leave the borders of the town. And so, but he does go out and have a ring made, and it has a topaz in it that's orange. And so he's clearly put, you know, took her into account in making this ring, and it's touching to her. And then she, you know, pulls out the ring that she gives to him, and it is this black metal, you know, sapphire, you know, clearly this sort of, you know, dark, well art designed, you know, sort of ring that goes on his finger. And then as soon as it's time to kiss the bride and the wedding is official, they kiss, and she kind of opens up her eyes during the kiss and sees off in the distance there's now a crown that is floating in midair. This black, ornate metal crown with sapphires in it. And they leave to go back to her place, and he surprises her at the very end when they get back there and says, I took the liberty of getting us a honeymoon, and we have reservations at this bed and breakfast in Kansas wine country in, you know, starting tomorrow, so we can, you know, get to know one another right if we're gonna do this. And that's at the point where she, I haven't decided yet whether she confesses or he finds out another way, that the whole reason why she has chased his family all the way from Eastern Europe to America basically created this deal and locked in this engagement was that if she can marry somebody from this very old bloodline, the Seneca bloodline, and then when she places the ring on their finger, that's when this artifact called the Crown of Night will finally appear. And then once she drinks the blood of her groom, she can actually take the Crown of Night and put it on her head and become the queen of all dark things across the world. And so now she's got this dilemma, because she can either do that thing that she has been building, that she's been chasing for centuries, working on, or she decides to explore these new feelings that she hasn't felt in 500 years for this guy. And so I don't have an ending. Like Dadrian, I don't know how this exactly ends, but I assume she makes the choice to spare him and is like, I think I'm more interested in following this thread of humanity as opposed to this thread of, you know, the supernatural dominion. So anyway, that is my untitled arranged marriage to a vampire story. Thank you for listening.
I have a question. If she does end up staying with him instead of becoming, you know, this very dark queen, does she turn him into a vampire to live forever with her?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like that is definitely the end of the movie somehow, and I don't know if it's a mutual thing, or if I have this image in my head of her making the choice to turn down the Crown of Night, and then this werewolf shows up and attacks. I don't know how exactly that connects, but I think, you know, in battling this werewolf, you know, Brian actually starts hucking the bridal china that they picked out together, which has silver edges around the sides, at the werewolf, is actually doing damage to the werewolf. And then, I don't know, maybe he gets, you know, he gets mauled by the werewolf or something, or loses a lot of blood from a wound, and then it's the, oh, I need to make you a vampire in order to save your life. I don't know if it's that, but I think there's some room for some some romantic decisions in there. So yeah, I mean, I think that that feels like what the ending is, although I'm not sure exactly how we get to it.
Yeah, because I think my only question would be sort of the conflict there at the end, because it doesn't, like, in some ways it kind of feels like she could have her cake and eat it too, that like, well, I mean, she just needs to turn him after and he's open to it. It's not like there's really a downside for anyone. So it's just sort of that question of what's driving her to, like, I have to get this Crown of Night because otherwise this other clan gets it, or otherwise this violent creature arises and no one's there to stop it, or maybe that's part of like what was causing the Dust Bowl or something else. So I'm just trying to figure out what our consequences are.
Right. That maybe the choice is that if she turns him, then she runs the risk of him becoming something that she's not in love with anymore. Power corrupts. She knows that would happen. So in order to kind of preserve their love, their arrangement, their relationship, then she would have to kind of turn down this Crown of Night, I think you called it.
Crown of Night, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the longer she hesitates, that's like, maybe there's a window in which she has to be able to claim this crown. She's got all the ingredients in order, and she just doesn't grab it at this point. And the longer she waits, now these other influences come in, because she's done the work for everybody else basically in getting the crown this close. Now it's just a matter of who's going to step up and grab it if she doesn't. So basically she becomes a victim of her own indecision. She's being forced to make this decision she doesn't want to make. That could be
I like that.
An interesting way to go with it.
Yeah, I like that. I like the conflict being her choice. Which way do I go? Do I choose career, or do I choose, relationship? And yeah, I mean, Dadrian, that's a very good point. Like, there's got to be something very clear in there about, like, well, you can't just, you know, satisfy the demand of the artifact by draining all of his blood and then, like, putting it all back in him, and then he rises as a vampire, and then you're the Dark Queen, and you kind of get everything you want. Yeah, there has to be, like, Dave, like you said, there's got to be some kind of a ticking clock on the taking of the crown, and it can't, you know, wait for him to become a vampire, or, you know, something like that. So, yeah, those are very good points. I'll rub these good points together.
It's a great theme of how badly do you want something, you know, if you spent all your life in pursuit of this one thing, then almost inevitably it seems the universe throws something at you to prove to yourself how badly do you want it. Will you destroy this, you know, other great things you have in your life in order to achieve that thing? It's like the final test that the universe seems to do. I've seen it happen many times in the mortal world. I've seen it happen. How bad do you want it?
Yes, absolutely.
Is the dust something that she uses to obscure the sun so she can walk in the day? I
think so.
Ability? Okay.
Yeah. I think it. I'm kind of thinking of it in terms of, like, you know, Dracula was able to control the weather, and he was, you know, able to summon storms and everything like that. So for her, I think it's like an extension of what she's able to do. Like, she did not create the Dust Bowl, but she's able to move through the dust and sort of, like, control it, and it becomes sort of like this insulator for her to be able to move around in the day under those circumstances.
I got a title for you.
Yeah. Dust
to Dust.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's excellent. Oh my God, that's excellent. That is excellent, Dave. Yes. In fact, I'm just going to say right now, the name of my pitch is Dust to Dust. And then I'll edit that in earlier in the, yeah. Perfect. Guys, I would love to see any one of these projects up on the big screen or on my Netflix. So well done. Thank you for bringing your A games to this pitch. Those were fantastic. And for those of you at home, if you were to pitch a arranged marriage to a vampire, what would that be like? We would love to know. So let us know down in the comments what you would do with this. And before we leave, if you guys would each, if you wouldn't mind saying how somebody can find you online, I'll just go around the group one more time. And Dave, let's start with you.
My website is dave3dguy.com, where you can see my past work in visual effects. I've got some animations on there, some basically a demo reel of sorts for my work over the years, and a list of all the projects I've worked on.
Excellent. Ariel?
You can find me at my website at arielsinelnikoff.com or on Instagram at ariel_Sinel, S-I-N-E-L. Yeah, I have my directing work, some of my writing work. I'm currently working on getting my first feature made, so you can see updates about that there.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Dadrian?
So you can find me on Twitter. I believe my handle is at AllDFlavors, or Instagram, Dadrian_Flavors. And you can also hit up my email. It's dflavors.film@gmail.com.
All right. Excellent. Well, pitchers, thank you very much for taking part of your weekend to come and do this. It was great listening to these. Thank you all for being here, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
So,